So here we are at past. I think I will commence. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. My name's David Widdowson. I'm the president of the International Network of Customs Universities, and I'll be moderating today's session. The theme of this year's WTO Public Forum is Trade Beyond COVID-19, Building Resilience. And as we well know, the pandemic has had a devastating economic impact on the international trading community with significant disruption to the global supply chain. So in this context, today's panel will be sharing their views on what customs administrations can do to help bolster supply chain recovery, renewal, and resilience to achieve international supply chain sustainability, particularly in light of the recent massive growth in e-commerce. Particular issues I'd like to explore with our panel members include the importance of collaboration, harnessing technology, and putting people at the center of the renewal process. And also, how can customs, which is uniquely positioned and mandated at international borders, contribute to establishing sustainable supply chains? And what are some of the initiatives, programs, and tools for building customs capacity towards that goal? Now, with us today to discuss these matters, we have four highly experienced and qualified panelists. Now, their bios are readily available in the conference materials, so in the interest of time, I won't go into any detail, but I'm delighted to welcome our panel members. Dr. Kunio Mikaria, Secretary General of the World Customs Organization, Ms. Teira Basalo, Director General of the National Customs Authority of Panama, Ms. Carol West, Secretary of the International Federation of Customs Brokers Associations, and Mr. Ho Lim, Director, Trade and Environment at the World Trade Organization. Now, during the first part of our session, I'll be asking our panelists a series of questions that I've prepared, following which I'll take questions from the audience. If you'd like to ask the panel a question, please type it into the question box on the conference platform. We have a total of 60 minutes, so I would ask our panelists to keep your answers to 3 minutes to ensure we have plenty of time for audience questions at the end. So firstly, in terms of the significant growth in e-commerce during the pandemic, I'll firstly go to Dr. Mikaria. Dr. Mikaria, during the pandemic, the WCO endorsed the e-commerce package to support implementation of the framework of standards for cross-border e-commerce. What have been the key challenges of customs administrations in implementing the framework during the pandemic crisis?
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and the question. The pandemic has accelerated the tremendous growth of cross-border e-commerce. While growing e-commerce is positive for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, for MSMEs and consumers, it imposes challenges to customs as we cannot rely on traditional clearance methods applied to containers. We usually know frequent traders behind containers, and in turn, they know how to comply with the customs procedures. On the contrary, it has become difficult to assess the profile of e-commerce importers, as they are often SMEs or consumers who are not familiar with the customs regulations. On one hand, the customs needs to facilitate legitimate e-commerce trade, but on the other hand, the customs administrations are faced with the risk of revenue leakage and illicit trade posing threats to health, safety, and security of citizens. Therefore, customs needs a faster shift towards the increased use of data and advanced technology to process the growing number of small parcels and manage their risks. As a response, the WCO has finalized its framework standards on e-commerce in 2020 to address these emerging trends by getting electronic advanced data from e-commerce actors for the risk management purpose. The key challenges of implementing the framework of standards and possible solutions that emerge so far include availability of quality data in a timely manner is the main challenge, as it also involves data privacy and trust issues. It will be difficult, however, to impose too much burden on data submission on MSMEs or consumers, and we need to involve e-commerce actors such as e-commerce platformers to get electronic advanced data. Building trust with the new e-commerce actors is another challenge, and expanding authorized economic operator concept to e-commerce stakeholders would be an important step forward. There is also a need for enhancing customs tax cooperation for the efficiency of revenue collection. To address these challenges and possible solutions, the WCO has already started the revision of the framework of standards, drawing on the experiences of our members. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mitri. It's very interesting the speed at which this has all happened, and some things can't quite move as fast as we'd like. But one thing you suggest is, in terms of expanding the AEO to include the e-commerce operators, I think that would be an excellent initiative. So thank you for that. Now, a question to Ms. Barcelo. Ms. Barcelo, how has Panama Customs addressed the increase in the growth of e-commerce? And I should also ask, for example, has the strategy taken into account or facilitated the inclusion of small traders?
Muchísimas gracias, David. En efecto, el comercio electrónico llegó para quedarse. Ya eso es indudable. Tenemos ese reto que todos los países tenemos que asumir y que tenemos que mejorar para poder que el consumidor, el Estado, pueda lograr todos sus objetivos fundamentales. Como dijo el señor Cunio, tanto la recaudación, la seguridad, así como los controles previos de las mercancías por los tamaños en que llegan, esos son los desafíos. Panamá ha primero actualizado la normativa, ha aplicado la normativa y luego en ese orden ha venido a estructurar todo lo que es el comercio electrónico desde el punto de vista de los consumidores y de las aduanas. Igualmente nos hemos sentado en mesas de trabajo con el sector privado, con el sector gubernamental y todas las fichas que juegan un papel fundamental para el trasiego del comercio electrónico a través de nuestro territorio, tanto transfronterizo como el comercio electrónico interno. Y de esa manera educar al público, darle a conocer que un comercio electrónico transfronterizo es una importación y que como es una importación tiene que cumplir unos requisitos especiales que se exigen dentro de la legislación, así como también a las empresas que se quieren dedicar a este tipo de actividades, empoderarlas y que cumplan con las normativas y de esa manera tener controles eficientes. Tenemos retos igualmente de implementar módulos electrónicos que nos permitan una verificación más puntual de las mercancías con anticipación, en atención a que la mayoría del comercio electrónico viene por aire, los tiempos de respuesta y los tiempos que esperan los beneficiarios finales de sus paquetes es rápido. Y en esa rapidez se requiere que los gobiernos aportemos iniciativas de maneras eficientes y eficaces para darle respuestas a los consumidores. Gracias.
Yes, okay, thank you, Ms. Barcelo. That's and it's very true that the private sector wants their goods as quickly as they can, and often don't take into account the issues that customs have to deal with. Can I ask the speakers just to turn off their microphone when they're not speaking? Thanks. And it's important, as you say, to include the private sector in discussions in relation to the way forward in a number of these issues. I mean, it's one thing to tell them what's going to happen, but if you can actually include them in the decision making, it can smooth the way. Now, in speaking of the smaller SMEs, often they use the. Can I ask somebody? Somebody seems to have their microphone giving us some feedback. So whoever that is, could you please turn it off? So often the SMEs actually use brokers in their initiatives with customs. So I should ask Ms. West, what are some of the issues that customs brokers have experienced in relation to the rapid growth in e-commerce during the pandemic?
Thank you very much, David, and it's a pleasure for me to be here with my distinguished panelists. Different regions of the world were and continue to be affected by the pandemic in different ways and at different times.
We can't hear you too well, Carol. Can you just check the volume there?
Let's give this a try, just one moment.
Okay, so we'll leave it at that, thanks. Please go ahead.
My apologies, is this any better? I think I've done everything I can do from my end. So again, different regions of the world were and continue to be affected by the pandemic in different ways and at different times. One thing we can say is that the fear and uncertainty associated with the pandemic caused many governments to make decisions urgently, with the result that existing consultative processes may not have been used, and if used, may not have been affected. In addition, both customs and business personnel adjusted to working from home, resulting in changes to processes and relationships. So it's difficult to generalize about global impacts, especially about something as complex as e-commerce. What we can say is that customs brokers who are licensed by governments and manage release of goods in many, many countries around the world have been at the forefront of the rapid growth of e-commerce, both before and during the pandemic. So let's start simply with one of the issues we wrestle with relating to e-commerce. What is it? Different countries often define e-commerce differently. It's defined by who buys, is it commercial or personal? Who sells and where from? How the purchase is made? Who transports the purchase? Courier, postal service, other modes of transportation, and other modes we certainly saw increasing during the pandemic. The physical size of the shipment, the value of the shipment, well, there are many possibilities. The WCO decided on several characteristics defining e-commerce in its framework of standards, and they include online ordering, sale, communication, possibly payment, cross-border transactions, physical tangible goods, and destined to the consumer or buyer, and that could be commercial or non-commercial. A second issue comes from a statement made to me by a customs official from an innovative administration at the first meeting of the WCO's working group on e-commerce, when she said, "I just don't know enough about the players and the processes to effectively manage risk." A third issue, which is always on my mind as a representative of business and of customs brokers, is how do we ensure compliance? In this case, with respect to e-commerce risk management and for revenue collection. Who's liable for data and for payment? What about different de minimis levels? One of the consequences of the pandemic has been expenditure of substantial sums of money by governments to support their citizens during a difficult time financially. So there's no appetite to forfeit opportunities to collect revenue. We saw during the pandemic that the growth of e-commerce is not just new trade, it's also a shift in trade to do business in a new way. E-commerce helped households and businesses get essential supplies and kept some sectors of the economy going that would otherwise have slowed down dramatically or even stopped trading altogether. This willingness to change has saved many businesses and demonstrated the power of e-commerce, especially for SMEs. We know that the landscape has changed, and we know that it's unlikely to return to its pre-pandemic shape. During this time of recovery, customs brokers and customs administrations are left trying to manage risk and clearance of large volumes of e-commerce goods while ensuring collection of revenue and compliance with national regulations. Perhaps we should forget about the differences inherent in e-commerce and talk about a single system for goods subject to the same rules, but perhaps with different processes to facilitate e-commerce.
Tremendous. Thank you for that, Carol. And I picked you up halfway through. I'm not sure what was going on there, but I think maybe we had some kangaroos on the line at this end. But it is it's interesting because we talk now about e-commerce, but I mean that is the way that the world is going, and the traditional methods are changing rapidly. And therefore, whilst now we talk about e-commerce, in the future we'll simply talk about commerce. And another important point that you make is the need for compliance and the need to ensure that even SMEs have somewhere to go so that they can ensure that what they're doing is in fact compliant with the cross-border regulations. So thank you. Now, turning to the issue of automation and noting that the pandemic has accelerated automation in customs, Dr. Mikaria, can you tell us more about the global trends in customs automation during the pandemic and how the WCO has been supporting its members in their development and implementation of the automated solutions?
Thank you for the question, very pertinent. The pandemic has forced us to go for virtual working environment like we experience today. We often say responses to COVID-19 brought the speeding up of adopting digital technology by several years, but it also applies to the customs domain, of course, and the customs administration used the opportunity to advance digitalization initiative of eliminating hard copy and cash payment towards paperless trade and contactless clearance of goods. In addition to digital customs, other government agencies have also progressed in digitalization. Therefore, we have a good chance of advancing single window to adopt the automation solution as a whole of government approach. Digital border procedures compels the harmonization of data requirements, and the WCO offers data model as a common language for information exchange between different stakeholders in the cross-border movement of goods and passengers. The WCO data model has recently been made available to everyone free of charge to support interoperability of cross-border trade systems. Earlier this year, the WCO carried out a survey on the use of latest technologies by customs administrations, resulting in the upcoming WCO-WTO paper on customs use of advanced technologies to facilitate and secure cross-border trade. The findings from the survey show that many WCO members are using advanced technologies such as Internet of Things, data analytics, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. Perhaps it's an early stage, but still they have already started that. And there is also a high interest in blockchain technology, although only a few have advanced towards the full deployment. As customs collect a huge amount of data at borders, the WCO is exploring data analytics to nurture data culture within customs administration towards a customs data ecosystem. For all interested viewers today, we will hold the 2021 WCO Tech Conference on 10th and 11th November, where we will place a spotlight on digitalization. More information is available on the WCO event webpage. Thank you.
Thank you, Kunya. That's a good advertisement too for the TechCon. I think that's it's interesting that the use of technology and the leaps in the use of technology amongst customs administrations is quite amazing at the moment, and the use of data analytics and artificial intelligence, for example, in terms of risk management and identifying potentially non-compliance compliant goods is quite staggering at the moment. It's an exciting time to be alive, I think, to see the advances that are taking place. Now, interesting that you mentioned TechCon, because my question to Ms. Basalo is, I know that you took part in WCO's first fully online TechCon last year, which focused on customs in the time of the pandemic. So what would you say was your administration's main achievement in relation to automation in the past year and a half?
Con el COVID, los retos fueron mucho más grandes. Todos los programas y las hojas de rutas que nos teníamos planteados tuvieron que cambiarse, modificarse y acelerarse. Con ese aceleramiento de la implementación de la tecnología, la digitalización de los procesos, vino el cambio total en todas las aduanas, sobre todo en los puestos fronterizos, en atención a la necesidad que se tenía de una rápida acción de parte del oficial aduanero, así como también limitar los contactos entre las personas, entre los documentos, por los riesgos que teníamos. En esa medida, hemos podido lograr a través de este año y medio la digitalización de los procesos, la adecuación de la firma electrónica en los puestos de toma de decisiones a nivel nacional, lo que implica que remotamente se pueden hacer las autorizaciones de las documentaciones a través de vías digitales, así como también los procesamientos de las cargas y el análisis de riesgo con anticipación que nos permite llevar un control adecuado de las mismas. Los procesos han sido culturales a nivel interno de la institución para cambiar la mentalidad del equipo para pasar de papel a digital, y ha habido un trabajo del personal técnico con el personal operativo para lograr una inserción de todo el equipo de trabajo. También una educación al usuario, a las navieras, a los corredores de aduana, a las empresas de carga, a los exportadores, a los importadores, a todos los incluimos dentro de ese proceso de cambio, porque no solamente las aduanas tenían que cambiar, sino también la otra parte, el grupo que activa y que participa diariamente de las transacciones aduaneras tenía que participar y también se tenía que modernizar. Entonces fue una parte integral que ha tenido frutos considerables, y ya estamos viendo cómo Panamá ya tiene un 10 y un 12% de incremento de su Producto Interno Bruto, lo que indica que la reactivación económica ha llegado y las facilidades están para quedarse.
Great. Thank you very much, Taira. Yes, it's interesting that you say that everybody in the supply chain, not only customs, has to be involved in the automation, and often we find that the private sector is actually taking the lead in a lot of these things, and often it's customs that is trying to catch up. Sometimes it's the other way around, but very often it can be the private sector that's taking the lead. So on that basis, I'll ask Carol now. I know you're a member of the WCO Private Sector Consultative Group. Has the PSCG noticed any particular improvements in customs automation over the last 18 months? And what are some of the remaining deficiencies that the private sector would like to see addressed?
Thanks for that question. I'm hoping my audio is better now. We're fine.
Look, your audio is perfect, and I've been receiving messages to say that whenever I'm listening to you, I need to turn off the interpretation. So it's working fine. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, David. So the short answer is yes, we have noticed improvements, which has been very encouraging for the private sector. And this is where I can once again congratulate the WCO for its leadership and responsiveness during the pandemic, with special thanks to Secretary General Cunio Mikaria. Mr. Mikaria has gone through some of the initiatives that have been discussed at the WCO. And again, many of these have been in conjunction with the private sector and adopted by the private sector. Since it was established, the Private Sector Consultative Group at the WCO has consistently argued for the elimination of paper and manual processes and the implementation of reliable, innovative, and efficient automated processes which are harmonized and can be shared across borders. This is another area where the WCO's instruments and standards are very helpful in leading global practice. As for the pandemic, I want to go back to starting with people again. Lockdowns during the pandemic caused people in both government and business to have to work from home. So even companies with a high degree of automation had to quickly maneuver to accommodate and secure remote processes. Now imagine managing remote processes when you live in a small home with a single computer and perhaps unstable internet access, with your children doing schoolwork right beside you. Under such conditions, it's amazing that automated processes were accelerated, but the challenges and costs of continuing with paper and manual processes during the pandemic meant that they were. Automated processes were also used by and for people on the front line to streamline the movement of essential workers and crews transporting essential goods across borders day after day. And during the pandemic, we also experienced the need for more automated, expedited processes to deliver data, not only for customs purposes, but for the requirements of other government agencies. And again, Dr. Mikaria talked about single window initiatives. Many other government agencies were directly involved with control of goods that were considered essential during the pandemic, managing risk and issuing permits and certificates for medicines and even food. So the principles of coordinated border management were more important than ever, and those principles often found life in new automated processes, bringing customs and other government agencies closer together from an automation perspective. The PSCG has recognized and argued for consistency in automation, especially in areas of paperless procedures, systems development, electronic data transmission, e-payment, risk management processes, and movement of revenue collection processes away from the border. Note that we're not only talking automation at time of risk assessment and release of goods at the border, but post-entry as well, with such things as refunds and adjustments. The importance of a legal framework to support these initiatives and national regulations cannot be overstated. So looking forward, my main concern is not so much about what still needs to be done, because there will always be a to-do list where automation is concerned. It's about how we can sustain the positive changes in support of automation and expedited procedures, which were so important and so successful during the pandemic. So before tackling any new automated initiatives, my advice would be to make a list of good practices in your countries which have made a difference during the pandemic, and ensure there's the legal foundation and political will to make them permanent. Thanks.
Thank you, Carol. And it's interesting that the pandemic has actually been something of a catalyst for moving some of these initiatives along. And as you say, some even from a customs point of view, you often had officers working from home with their poor internet access, etc. And sometimes the government firewalls wouldn't actually allow them to access the systems that were essential. But interesting that you've also mentioned the need for better coordination amongst government agencies, taking that step towards a single window, if you like, and having the pandemic as the catalyst in that regard. So, look, I'd now like to look at the question of resilience, and perhaps Tara, I could ask you a question first. How has the pandemic affected priority setting in Panama Customs, and have any strategies been put in place to help you cope with any further challenges that may affect cross-border processing in the future?
Gracias. El tema económico, la restricción del presupuesto gubernamental para inversiones ha sido un reto increíble. Además, unido al tema del drama vivido por el COVID y las afectaciones humanas que recibimos en nuestras familias y en nuestro entorno laboral. Esos han sido unos retos que nos impulsan y nos motivan a la creatividad y a la resiliencia. Y en ese sentido, las aduanas panameñas realizaron todo un proceso de reestructuración presupuestaria y de prioridades en sus inversiones dentro de aquellas que tuviesen un menor costo o peso presupuestario a nivel gubernamental. Y eso fue muy positivo. En la medida en que ya tenemos un 70% de la población vacunada, eso nos ha permitido la apertura del comercio, aunque en Panamá el comercio nunca se detuvo, el comercio internacional no se detuvo, incluso la cantidad de contenedores que pasaron a través del canal o de un océano al otro fueron 8 millones, aumentando en 1 millón versus el año pasado, lo que significa que fuimos un elemento fundamental, las aduanas y el país, para el intercambio comercial y el hub logístico mundial. En ese sentido, las aduanas panameñas ahora están conectándolo con la tecnología, con la implementación, por ejemplo, de equipos de escáneres en diferentes puntos y utilizando esas tecnologías para ser más eficientes y lograr de esa manera que nuestros oficiales de aduana tengan menos contacto, tengan menos riesgo y podamos realizar un control de las mercancías de manera eficiente y sobre todo cuidando al ser humano.
Yes, thank you, Tara. And yes, it is always customs' role to ensure that everything is continuing regardless of the environment in which we're operating, and it's a case of carrying on. You often hear people say, "Are we prepared for this?" And the answer is very often is maybe you're not, but it's here. You've got to deal with it now and here and now. You have to deal with it. So thank you for that. Might ask Mr. Lim in terms of WTO. Mr. Lim, what are the main obstacles to trade resilience that the WTO has observed during the pandemic, and what will be the priority of the WTO in addressing these in the post-pandemic era?
Thanks very much, David, and thanks for the questions. If I might, before I get to the trade resilience question, just a very quick comment on the e-commerce question that you already asked. I think I just wanted to mention that from what you said, if e-commerce will be the commerce of the future and we would just be talking about commerce, it'd be important to also think about these issues in terms of what already exists in terms of WTO agreements to address some of the challenges that were already mentioned in terms of consumer protection, compliance with health and safety regulations. In this sense, whether we do it through e-commerce or whether we do it through commerce as in a traditional way, we have the technical barriers to trade agreement, we have the SPS agreement. Both of these agreements are laying out a framework of rules to basically address some of the challenges that the customs authorities and the organizations already mentioned, be it in terms of consumer protection, compliance with health and safety regulations. And of course, a key factor here is to try to align towards international standards. So there is a framework there, and that's something to think about and to use. And then there's an additional question about what more rules need to be negotiated and need to be added to this framework. And as you know, this is currently ongoing at the WTO. And one very quick point I don't think has been raised so far is the development dimension when we talk about e-commerce. This is something that is very much in discussion here about how do we ensure that the e-commerce developments are inclusive. Developing countries have an opportunity to also engage in this area. More specifically to what you just asked about on trade resilience, just some very quick points really. I think it was really highlighted by a couple of speakers that it was a very big shock, a global shock, and of course a shock to the global trading system, the pandemic that is. However, we also have seen that supply chains held up reasonably well, even during the pandemic, despite some hurdles and bumps along the road. Recent figures are showing that there was a sharp decline, but there's also been a recovery. The volume of trade in 2021 was up by 5.7%. It's the largest increase since the third quarter of 2011. That being said, we need, of course, to be very mindful about how can we ensure that supply chains continue to be resilient. Some of the things that we have been monitoring and the Secretariat have been issues such as export restrictions, regulatory bottlenecks, red tape, input shortages, here particularly in terms of production and supply of vital medical products, PPE and vaccines. I think monitoring and transparency is a key part of trying to ensure that supply chains remain resilient. There is ongoing work currently in WTO looking specifically at COVID-19 and WTO's response to COVID-19. These consultations are still going on under the auspices of the General Council. And the objective is to try to work towards an MC12, our ministerial conference coming up in November, a work program. Again, some of the key topics linking back to resilience are about export restrictions, trade facilitation, how do we ensure better regulatory cooperation, regulatory coherence, role of services, and transparency and monitoring, and of course, collaboration with other organizations, including customs. So I would finish on that point and just sort of say, as we think about pandemic, also think about climate change. The shocks to the pandemic were big. The expected shocks from climate change are expected to be even bigger. And so trade resilience should be looked at a bigger angle, including the climate change aspects. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lim. Yeah, it's important for not only customs, but other government organizations and international organizations to be flexible and agile in order to respond to these occurring, well, hopefully nothing occurring as bad as the pandemic, but who knows what's around the corner. And as you say, climate change could well be the next major thing that we're looking at. I should ask, in terms of the brokers, Carol, what expectations do supply chain stakeholders have of the WCO in terms of its future priorities? In answering this question, perhaps you could touch on some of the more significant issues that arose during the PSCG's discussions on the WCO environmental scan.
Happy to do that, but rather than start with a list of issues that came out of the PSCG's report on the environmental scan, I want to highlight one of its key messages, and that is we need to start today to manage the priorities for the way forward. So in a way, agreement on the need for change and priorities for change is the easier part. What seems to be more difficult is developing concrete action plans with fixed deadlines and getting to work today, not tomorrow. I hope the future will be full of possibilities post-recovery, but this is a different kind of recovery. As business, we're familiar with financial crises. We plan as much as we can for them, and they still have deep and damaging impacts. Think of the 2008 global financial crisis when things fell apart so quickly and global recovery was so difficult. With the pandemic, the financial crisis has been accompanied by a medical crisis, and we've struggled as citizens and as governments to understand what we need to do and then get it done. In some sectors, businesses may be unable to recover because they're not able to be open for periods of time and because staff have moved on and are not available to return to work. Many of those businesses are SMEs, and I know everyone on this panel is concerned about the position of SMEs post-recovery. We also, I think, have to remember that customs administrations have responsibility for control of people as well as goods in many countries. One of the fundamental responsibilities of governments is to keep its citizens safe, and customs often the agency that is responsible for doing that. Priority is often publicly assigned to that role, and the pandemic has made this clearer than ever, with travel restrictions enforced across borders and even within countries. So decision-making about the movement of people within countries and across borders is politically volatile and may be politically costly. So commercial trade can be a secondary consideration as long as the goods are flowing. And again, there was a reference to supply chains having sustained their activity during this very difficult time. But it can be difficult to get the attention that's needed when it is needed for trade recovery. There's also the reality that perhaps there are problems with this pandemic for which customs has no solutions. Let me give you an example. At our PSCG meeting yesterday, we had a good discussion about the current global crisis in the marine mode, which has been extensively reported in the media. Everything from a shortage of available containers, congestion in ports, shortage of truck drivers and labor on the docks. All of this is interconnected, and there's a grim prognosis: rising freight rates, prices of everything else, including food, and shortages of consumer goods. We concluded during our discussion that this is basically a logistics problem and that there may be very little that the WCO or its members can do, even though this will continue to impede recovery. And I'd like to leave with a final thought about resilience. It seems simple. You stretch a rubber band and it returns to where it was. The idea of resilience is about snapping back quickly. The thing is, I don't think we need the kind of resilience that brings us back to our starting point. That's where we were. We want and need resilience that gives us confidence and inspires us to go beyond, to keep moving forward. There have been many lessons learned during the pandemic, and with the best parts of customs business collaboration motivating us to go beyond where we've already been and wanting to do better post-recovery. We just need to get there. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Carol. And yes, it's very important to for all members of the international supply chain to be proactive rather than reactive. And as you say, a lot of people are talking about getting back to normal, and using your terminology, it's not going to be the same as the old normal. It's going to be the new normal. We need to move fairly quickly because I want to get, there's a couple of audience questions in here, but in relation to ensuring an effective and equitable transition towards more inclusive, sustainable and greener supply chains, if I could ask you, Cunio, the WCO is committed to supporting implementation of the UN Sustainable Development Goals within the scope of its responsibilities. What can you tell us about the WCO's work under the sustainability agenda?
Sure. As customers implement national laws and regulations at borders in a wide range of areas, its activities are well related to the topics covered by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The WCO therefore set the theme of 2020 as customers fostering sustainability for people, prosperity, and the planet to raise awareness of customer contributions to the sustainability agenda. I would like to highlight some of the recent WCO initiatives in this respect. Under the pandemic, the WCO Council adopted last year in December the resolution to facilitate the cross-border movement of medicines and vaccines directly related to the SDG to ensure a healthy life. And of course, it is also linked to the resilience that you have discussed just before. And the same WCO Council also adopted the declaration to promote gender equality and diversity in customs. Another direct contribution to gender equality, that is the SDG. But also we see that this could improve inclusiveness of customs administrations, and that should be extended to our traders as well. More broadly, all of WCO's tools and standards quite often are related to domestic resource mobilization, development of international trade, safety of people, and strong institutions by capacity building. So they are very much connected. And especially you talked about greening supply chain. And from the environmental perspective, the WCO has been an active partner to the Green Customs Initiative, and the WCO has the environmental program to contribute to the combating of environmental crime, in particular, illegal wildlife trade, illegal trade in hazardous and other waste, ozone depleting substances, and illegal trade in timber in support of multilateral environmental agreements. The harmonized system of tariff classification is another important WCO tool to address green supply chains, including the HS 2022 provision for the e-waste and the upcoming work in support of plastic waste management for the 2027 edition of the harmonized system. They try to identify what are the e-waste or hazardous plastic waste. And also by monitoring and making the entire supply chain traceable for environmental sustainability could be another contribution of customs to circular economy goals in decoupling economic growth from CO2 emissions and resource usage. The WCO is working with members and partners to provide reflection on customs contribution to circular economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Kumio. And yeah, it's very interesting that, and good to see that the WCO is looking to the future. I mean, we haven't even implemented HS 2022 yet, and we're already looking at 2027. So that's great to see. One final question from me is to you, Mr. Lim, as Director for Trade and Environment with the WTO. Can you tell us about some of the key priorities for the WTO in the next few years in terms of transitioning towards more inclusive, sustainable, and greener supply chains?
Yes, thank you very much, David. I mean, as has been already mentioned, the two guiding frameworks are the Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2030, and of course, the Paris Climate Change Agreement. So our work is really under those frameworks. And here, you know, very, very immediately, a key priority right now is to complete the negotiations on fisheries subsidies, which is under SDG 14.6. This is work that has been going on for some time, but there's really particular urgency right now. And the purpose of this agreement will be to prohibit subsidies to vessels engaged in illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, and to reform subsidies that contribute to overfishing and overcapacity. And at the same time, it is a challenging work, because we also need to take into account specific needs of developing countries. But that's a key priority, and one which there's a lot of political will to go forward and to try to conclude by our ministerial meeting in November. If we do that, that would be one very concrete contribution to the SDGs. At the same time, WTO has a standing committee on Trade and Environment. It was established at the establishment of the WTO itself. And this committee has the mandate to discuss trade and environmental measures with potential significant trade effects and to arrive at coherent win-win solutions. Just by way of example, the types of things we talk about, relate to supply chains in terms of illegal logging, sustainable fisheries, sustainable agriculture, fossil fuel subsidies, and so forth. The main point here is that we are seeing increasing attention and actually increasing demand for more work in this direction. At the same time, just to finish, two very new initiatives. They were launched last year by groups of WTO members. One is called the Structured Discussion on Trade and Environmental Sustainability. It's an initiative seeking to promote transparency, information sharing across the range of WTO work, but with particular focus on trade and environmental goods and services, the circular economy, a look at trade-related climate change measures, and aid for trade for the environment. And again, they are heading towards having a work program for the ministerial conference. And the last one I would just mention is WTO's contribution to the fight against plastics pollution. A group of members, again, have created a group here to look at how can trade contribute to addressing plastic pollution. And they have drilled down into looking at very specific issues in the plastic supply chain, from regulatory restrictions to technical requirements and so forth. I know time is short, so I won't go into much detail, but basically to say that what's interesting about these initiatives is that it's not secretariat driven, it's member driven. And that's the nature by which WTO tends to proceed. It's the members taking the initiatives, but we providing them with the support. So it's very much integrated into the work right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ho. And yes, there's clearly a lot going on at the international level, and it's great to hear that it is being driven by the members. I'm very conscious of the time, and we do have a few questions. I don't think we'll get through them all because there's a great deal of interest, but I'll put this one out. It's from Algerian customers, and it's in relation to e-commerce. And it says, could you provide some guidance on what kind of customs provisions or actions could be useful in developing countries to stimulate e-commerce usage? Who would like to respond to that one?
Thank you. Can I respond? Of course, the WTO has come up with the framework of standards for cross-border e-commerce, which involves how to use advanced electronic advanced data to really manage risks and also facilitate legitimate trade, because our aim is essentially to facilitate legitimate e-commerce trade. And but of course, we are revenue agency, and also we have to protect the society. And this is why we need to apply good risk management so that we can facilitate legitimate trade. And this framework of standards is, well, that was rather new. It was adopted last year, December. So we are doing our regional workshops to raise awareness and hear more from our members how they implement those standards. But this already those tools are there, and we are ready to provide capacity building support for implementing our standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Cunio. I might throw this one to Carol to get a private sector view. The audience member says that e-commerce presents significant opportunities for SMEs, but the customs authorities are imposing restrictions in terms of more data, eliminating de minimis thresholds, etc. And this increases the processing costs and burdens on SMEs. So he's saying, should customs look at more trade efficient means of clearing e-commerce shipments, which is more critical given the role that e-commerce plays in the current climate. I'm going to tackle that one, Carol, and then somebody else may want to jump in.
It's not an easy question because, again, practice varies from country to country. And just building on what Cunio said about the tools that are available in the e-commerce framework of standards, one of the things that I was going to add is that what sometimes overwhelms both traders and customs administrations is transaction by transaction processing of e-commerce shipments. So again, we talked a little bit about strengthening AEO programs, for example, during the pandemic. Those AEOs may be carriers who could facilitate the access by SMEs to electronic commerce channels, excuse me. And they may be, again, other customs agencies that SMEs need to interact with. Again, looking at the SME as a very positive influence in terms of pandemic recovery and using the e-commerce framework of standards, which sets out various business models where people other than SMEs in the chain of e-commerce activity take responsibility. I'm back to responsibility and compliance, which may be a burden for SMEs, take on that responsibility for compliance and liability in e-commerce transactions.
Thanks, thanks, Carol. Does anyone else want to add to that one? We might leave it there then, and then there's one more.
Tenemos los retos de procurar evitar el comercio ilícito, tanto del trasiego de armas pequeñas o piezas de armas, así como también el blanqueo de capitales. Entonces, son retos grandes que tenemos, sobre todo en los controles que todos los países tenemos que realizar y balancear entre la facilitación del comercio y también el control para evitar que el comercio ilícito se introduzca dentro de estas actividades que de alguna manera salen mucho más informales que otras actividades.
Yes, thank you, Tara, and it brings home the fact that whilst customs does have a role in facilitating trade, they actually have a role in facilitating legitimate trade, and it's the issue of identifying what may be legitimate and what may not. I'm being given a bit of a wrap up here. So an hour goes very, very quickly. We haven't got through all the questions, but I might ask the organisers in the WCO to perhaps have a look at those questions, which are captured online, and we may be able to get some responses to them, to those audience members who've asked the questions over the next few days. So I'd like to thank our panelists for their insightful input to today's session, and also thank our audience for the thought you put into your questions. I trust you found the session to be an enjoyable and productive one, which really leaves me with the pleasurable task of individually thanking today's panelists. So I'd like to thank Dr. Cunio Mikaria, Ms. Tara Basalo, Ms. Carol West, and Mr. Ho Lim. Thank you very much, and I wish everybody a successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your excellent chair, David. And thank you for the co-panelists.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.